If you've looked into building an ADU in San Diego, you've probably noticed that the rules don't always make sense. That's because the state has its own ADU law and the city has its own code, and they don't always match. In fact, sometimes they actually contradict each other. So, today we're going to be going side by side to hopefully clear up the confusion. Sean, to kick us off, can you give us a high level overview on the key differences between the City of San Diego code and the state ADU law before we dive into some more specific development scenarios?
Okay, no problem, Billy. So let me just lay some groundwork first. So ADUs are a state initiative. It didn't like originate at the local level of San Diego, although we did have something called companion units before ADUs were a thing in 2020. But basically, the state makes the rules. The city needs to adopt those same exact rules, and they cannot like minimize what the state requirements are. The cities each have the ability to expand upon the ADU regulations. And in some cases, they have done that. And City of San Diego is a fairly good example of that. So to kick off this conversation, I want to ask you a question. The question is, how many multiple dwelling units can you fit in a multiple dwelling unit structure?
I'm not going to be able to give you a good answer on this. My guess would be two, though.
I mean, you'd have to, if you had a 10 unit multiple dwelling unit structure, how many multiple dwelling units are in that structure?
10 unit multiple dwelling, I don't know, 20 perhaps? My initial thought was two duplexes. That's where I got the two from.
So this question is impossible to answer. And that's the whole point of this podcast. The way the city has written their municipal code, it is impossible to come to a conclusion on what you can build in certain circumstances. So let me share my screen and then we'll dive into the city's written code. We'll compare it with the state's written code, and then we'll come to some consensus about what you can actually build, irregardless of how clear the city of San Diego's municipal code is.
Got it. Would you say at a high level this is intentionally done to be confusion, or is it more just incompetence as per usual?
Well, this is a very poorly written code, and this should never have made it into the municipal code the way it's written right now. Um, so I don't want to chalk up incompetence to this, but I also don't think it was intentionally done. I think it's just really bad writing, uh, and then whoever is proofreading this before it gets published basically was on vacation. So, okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, so what are we looking at between the left hand and the right hand side?
Okay, the left hand side is the state ADU regulations. And the right hand side is the most updated City of San Diego regulations. So let's jump into this. It starts off kind of straightforward, but by the time we get down here to subsection 3B, you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so right off the bat, the first question: what can you build if you have an existing single dwelling unit? So over here, we'll start with the city regulations. So it says on a premises with an existing or proposed, and these two terms are very important to understand this. So let's say you have an existing single dwelling unit. By the way, before I go any further here, I just want to stop and make one more important point here. Previously, we would have to dive into the zoning regulations to determine what you can build. You still have to do that a little bit, but in terms of ADU development, 99% of your answers can be determined by what is existing on the property. So basically, this makes it very convenient for real estate agents. And I just gave a pretty in depth presentation to a group of real estate agents to explain this. And it also makes it very accessible to homeowners, with the exception of the written language here. So, okay, back to this. On a premises with an existing or proposed single dwelling unit, the following is permitted. And then you have subsection A here. So we can do one ADU that is within an existing or proposed single dwelling unit or within an existing accessory structure. And then they give some minor footnotes here, which we don't have to get into right now. So that's option one. And then we can combine this with option two here, which is one attached or detached ADU. So, so far, I think this is fairly clear. If you have an existing home or if you have a vacant lot and you're proposing to build an existing home, you could essentially get two ADUs. One would have to be what they call here within the proposed single dwelling unit. Or if you have an existing dwelling unit, you can split that in half essentially, make half an ADU, half a dwelling unit. Or if you have an existing garage or accessory structure, that could become an ADU. And then in addition to that, we could also do one attached or detached ADU. Now let's compare that with the first section here of the state code and the second section of the state code. So it says one ADU per lot is permitted within the converted space of a proposed or existing dwelling or accessory structure. And this type of ADU must have exterior access and setbacks, et cetera, et cetera. But then also it says ADUs converted from an accessory structure are eligible for 150 square foot addition. So that's the same thing that it's saying here. And then it goes into JADUs here. We're going to ignore JADUs for the purpose of this podcast. And then, so this section here, number one, almost directly corresponds with section one over here of the city regulations. So far, we're right on course. Now, number two here, single family detached ADUs. So it says one detached new construction ADU that does not exceed 4 foot side and rear yard setbacks is permitted on a lots with an existing or proposed single family dwelling unit. And that basically corresponds with B here, although in the city of San Diego, they're allowing it to be attached. And then in addition to that, some of these setbacks that are listed here do not always apply in the city of San Diego. So let's jump over to the diagrams here. So in these diagrams that I'm going to use to explain this, anything that's white is an existing dwelling unit, and anything that's charcoal gray is an existing garage or accessory structure. So let's say you're in this scenario here. You have an existing dwelling unit and you have an existing garage. Well, here's a couple options of what you can do. We know we can build one attached or detached dwelling unit, sorry, ADU. So that's what we could build here. And in this context, this would be considered a detached ADU because it's detached from the dwelling unit, but we also could attach this to the dwelling unit here. And then we can leave the garage. So that's certainly an option for you. Another option would be you could convert the garage. So here was our existing garage, and here's our garage conversion to an ADU. And then we still have that other ADU on the table. So we can get the two ADUs on a lot that has an existing or proposed single dwelling unit. Now, it doesn't matter if it's a multifamily zone or single family zone, these are your options. Okay, here's another scenario. And I just want to use this to kind of explain some of the challenges that come up with the permitting process and how that kind of conflicts with what you're allowed to do here. So in this scenario, you have an existing single family dwelling unit, doesn't matter what zone it is, but there's no garage or accessory structure on this lot. So one option would be you could just build a detached ADU and leave the existing single family dwelling unit, and that's totally cool. Like I mentioned earlier, you could also just attach this over here, and that is permitted in the city of San Diego. Now, what you could also do is because there's no garage structure, we're allowed to build the ADU, quote unquote, within the dwelling unit. So, existing dwelling unit, which we can recall from back here, and now we can split that dwelling unit in half without adding any square footage. And now we have half dwelling unit, half ADU, essentially a duplex. Technically, we're also allowed to add an additional 150 square feet for ingress into this structure if we wanted to, but that's not really, we don't have to get into that level of detail here. So you're allowed to convert the dwelling unit into half ADU or a third ADU, whatever makes sense. And then you can still build that detached ADU. Now, here's another scenario. You start with the existing dwelling unit over here. We now propose we build one detached ADU, which is this pink mass here. And in the same permit, we're also going to propose to build a garage, which is this orange mass. Now, after the project is complete, you get final inspection signed off. We could now come and convert that garage into another ADU. And that's how we go from one existing single family dwelling unit to two ADUs by the end of the project. It just requires two permits. Okay, so here's where it's going to get a little complicated. So here in the city ADU regulations, we now are going to we're now going to start with a premises with a proposed multiple dwelling unit structure. So it says the maximum number of ADUs on a premises with a proposed multiple dwelling unit structure shall not exceed two detached ADUs. And now we can go over here and let's take a look at how this compares to the state regulations. ADUs may be created within the portions of existing multifamily structures that are not used as livable space. Local agencies shall allow at least one ADU within an existing multiple family dwelling unit up to 25% of the existing. Okay, so I'm just going to cut to the chase here. Subsection 3 in the ADU code is actually referring to subsection 3A in the local code. And subsection 4 in the state code is a little bit of subsection 2 in the city code and subsection B 3B in the local San Diego code. Okay, so let's just kind of dive into this and figure out what it says. So first, we'll go through this. We'll go through the city code again. Okay, so if you're proposing a multiple dwelling unit structure, which means two dwelling units in a single structure, you could then build two detached ADUs. So in a nutshell, that's this scenario here. Now, here you would be proposing two dwelling units. So actually, let me paint these a different color to make that super clear. So these are being proposed, and we could basically propose this, and then on the same permit, we could propose an additional ADU, or we could propose two ADUs. Basically, to boil this down, you can match the number of dwelling units with ADUs. And you're going to see in the next section how we can do this up to 8 ADUs. So you're proposing two dwelling units. You can also get up to two ADUs. That's pretty simple. Okay, here's where it kind of all falls apart. This section here. Okay. So on a premises with an existing multiple dwelling unit structure. Now, this is a quintessential difference from proposed to existing. So you could do this with a second permit. You could propose a multiple dwelling unit structure, and then with a second permit, now you have an existing multiple dwelling unit structure, but you got to jump through a lot of hoops for that. So let's just read through what this says. On a premises with an existing multiple dwelling unit structure, the following applies, and we have two options. The first one I think is less important than the second, so I'm just going to skip here. A maximum of 8 detached ADUs may be permitted on a premises provided that the number of detached ADUs shall not exceed the number of existing multiple dwelling units in the multiple dwelling unit structure. This is the most poorly written section in the entire municipal code in the city of San Diego, because this is that riddle that we started the conversation with. There's no way to determine how many ADUs you can build in this context without going back to the state regulations so you can really understand what they meant by this. So let's read this section here. Up to 2 detached ADUs are allowed on a lot that has a proposed multifamily dwelling. Okay, so that was the first section we talked about, number 2. But then it says, or up to 8 detached ADUs are allowed on a lot with an existing multifamily dwelling, not to exceed the number of existing units on the lot. So you see here they use number of existing units. And if the city changed their terminology here, it would make sense. So it should really be updated so people can understand what this means. So here's what this means in a nutshell. If you were to have an existing multiple dwelling unit structure, which has in this scenario 4 units, and you can kind of see here how I'm trying to represent 4 units. That's an existing condition. Well, now we can build 4 ADUs. And you can do this up to 8 ADUs. So if this was an 8-plex, you could, if you had the space for it, you could build 8 detached ADUs. Another thing that should be updated is when it says detached, it should be made clear that this means detached from the multiple dwelling unit structure, but it does not necessarily mean detached from other ADUs. That's very important clarification that should be really made here. Now, if this was 8, we'd be able to build 8. If this was 10, we'd still only be able to build 8 ADUs. Okay, now let's just dive into the last section of this, which is kind of this like little quirk. So here it says on a premises with an existing multiple dwelling unit structure, the following applies. The maximum number of ADUs that may be permitted within the existing non-livable space of an existing multiple dwelling unit structure shall not exceed 25% of the total number of multiple dwelling units in the structure, and then et cetera, et cetera. But it never drops below 1. So this scenario here, we have a fourplex existing garage. You can divide the 4 by 25%, so you get 1, and we could convert that garage into 1 ADU. In the scenario where this was, let's say, an eightplex, we could divide that by 25%, and we can convert this existing garage into 2 ADUs. So it's extremely complicated the way this is written, and the state ADU regulations kind of clarifies it a little bit. But is this making sense so far, Bailey?
It is a little complex. I mean, for people who are not as familiar with the ADU code as you are, of course, how would you just like quickly summarize the issues that you've just laid out?
Okay, well, it's the obligation of the city to tell us what we can build. And if the city's development service department is as busy as they make it out to be, providing this clarification would help them be less busy because I'm sure they're fielding a million questions right now about what you can build because of how unclear this code is written. And I think the average person doesn't understand you can defer to the state regulations and the city cannot say you can't build those because the state regulations are basically gospel. So, if you have an existing single family home, you could easily build one attached or detached ADU. If you have an existing or proposed single family home, or like let's say you bought a vacant lot and you're proposing single family home, well, you can do the same thing. You can build that first dwelling unit and you can attach an ADU to it. You could also build that first dwelling unit and build a detached ADU. So any single family residential zone lot, you can automatically easily get 2. If you have an existing dwelling unit or an existing accessory structure, which could be a garage or it could be a mechanical space or something like that, well, you're able to convert those existing spaces into ADU spaces. But don't forget about the loophole that you could always permit these accessory structures and then come back and make those ADUs, which is a pretty strong move. It's just a lot of paperwork. And, California is like known for this. We just add paperwork on top of paperwork. I don't understand why the city can't just cut to the chase and say, hey, listen, we know what the goal is here. Let's just do this in one permit and save everybody a bunch of headache. But for some reason, we don't do this. Now, if you have an existing multiple dwelling unit structure, which means 2 or more dwelling units in one structure, well, that's where there's a lot of opportunity because you could immediately build 2 detached ADUs. And if you have an existing multiple dwelling unit structure where you have 8 or 10, you could now build 8 detached ADUs that could be attached to each other. These are much more complicated projects, and you should have an architect involved in the project at this point because you bring up like utility issues, fire separation issues, ADA issues, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to be fairly complicated. If you have a multifamily zoned lot, a lot that would allow you to build a multifamily structure with 2 or more dwelling units, there's also a lot of opportunity here because you could build 2 dwelling units in a multiple dwelling unit structure and then also build 2 ADUs. So you could basically take almost any residential multifamily zone and build 4 units in 2 duplexes. That would be like a reasonable way to do it. The one big gray area that neither code really addresses is what happens in the scenario where you have two existing single family dwelling units on the same lot. Are those supposed to follow the code for existing single family dwelling units, or can that follow the code for an existing multiple dwelling unit structure? If you go by the word of the city's code, a multiple dwelling unit structure by definition means the dwelling units need to be in the same structure. However, I have recently had a conversation with Development Services Department, and they say that's not the way they see it, even though that's the way their code is written. So the way the city of San Diego is interpreting multiple dwelling unit structure is different than the written code, their own written code. So according to the DSD, if you have two single family dwelling units on the same lot, that's considered a multiple dwelling unit structure. So a lot of gray area here. Gray area means risk for a developer. You know, you can submit something by the written word of the code, and now the Development Services Department can have a different interpretation of their own code. So it's disappointing that a code with this language makes it into the actual code. Like, how does this language make it into the code? Somebody's asleep at the wheel. I'm not really sure how, but it's there. We're working with it, and we're hoping that it's going to be revised so it provides more clarity in the next iteration of the code updates.
Yeah, well, as we've talked about often on this podcast show, oftentimes what the code says is actually much different in practice in terms of how it's applied. So people should definitely be aware of that. At a high level, I imagine, like, what is your opinion between, obviously the state sets the ADU regulations. How do you think the city code should interplay with those existing regulations? As far as I understand, it's only to build upon, but not necessarily to restrict further. So I could see the point of there being, every city, not just big ones like San Diego or LA, wanting to have specific regulations to the city in order to, like, have a better quality of life for its residents and maybe take advantage of certain things. But it seems like it just adds more unnecessary complication, essentially.
Yeah. So the cities have to do what the state is saying. So they have to at least meet these minimum requirements. But I guess you have to go back to the intent. So what is the intent? Because the building department also goes back to intent, and they say, well, we don't think that's the intent of the code. But luckily, there is no denying what the intent of the ADU regulations are. The intent is to address the housing crisis and get more residential units that people can live in built. That's like the most clear intent. It's unarguable. So what the city should do is find a way to make this crystal clear so that there's no confusion, because confusion adds risk, it adds time, it adds cost to every project. And in the circumstances where there are these, I mean, I don't believe there are any loopholes in the municipal code, and I have taken this up with the directors of the Development Service Department. I said, it seems like I could get one permit to build a garage and then get a second permit to convert that garage to an ADU. And they said, yeah, absolutely, you can. So what I would like to see from the city of San Diego is to say, okay, if that is permittable, let's just streamline that process. Let's just rewrite the code rewrite the municipal code to say, hey, you actually could just build two ADUs instead of going through all of this process to permit a garage, because that's just adding cost and fees and process. It's wasting homeowners' time. It's wasting development services department's time. So let's just cut to the chase. That's what I would like to see the city do. Now, I think you were probably going to ask this question as a follow-up. The city of San Diego has done a good job of adding to the code with their ADU home density bonus program. It used to be called the ADU bonus program. So that is a great addition. There's a lot of opportunity. That has been met with incredible opposition from NIMBY groups. And we should do another podcast about the mental gymnastics that you have to do to say you cannot build density, but also believe in personal property rights, because the two just do not correlate. So I would like the city to simplify things. I would like the city to streamline things. I appreciate that the city has gone above and beyond with the ADU home density bonus program, but there's still a lot of work to be done here.
Yeah, well, I definitely don't think it should be like an algebra equation to figure out how many units you can build on your lot. I
Mhm.
feel like it should be very, very straightforward, just like a simple diagram. If this, then that sort of a deal. So yeah, especially because when you going back to the intent, like you just mentioned, the real intent is that any normal homeowner should be able to interpret the code and then determine what they want to build, not necessarily an architect with like 15 years of experience like you.
Mhm. And, before this code update, which was August of 2025, I mean, I probably had the most understanding of the previous ADU regulations than anybody in the city because how many conversations I had to have with the development service department about the previous code. And then they changed it all. And, I've also been having these conversations, but you just can't get past the written language of this because ultimately it doesn't matter what anybody says when you talk to them. What matters is what they say when you submit the project. And if you submit the project and they say, no, 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 this is what the code says, and you don't meet those requirements, you're dead in the water and you've just wasted a whole bunch of your client's time and money. So it's just got to be updated. It's, in my opinion, it's like very unacceptable that it was published this way.
Definitely. Are there any things you want to mention before we look to wrap up here?
Oh, yeah. So I want to talk about one of the tools that I've built to help people understand the municipal code. So let me just do a quick screen share again here and show you what I got going on. Okay, so let me know when you can see the screen.
I can see it.
Okay, so, my frustration with the ADU code, I think I've made that pretty clear. When the ADU code is updated, I try to publish what is essentially a cliff notes for understanding the ADU code so I can share this with my clients and explain to them exactly what this means. So I just finished this document this week. Um, it's it's a free guide that people can download, and Bailey, maybe you can put a link to this in the notes of this meeting. But when I go online on Instagram, because of my search history, I get a lot of offers for these free ADU guides. And I've taken a look at what other people are providing. And in my humble opinion, this one is the most valuable one that I've ever seen. This took me months to put together. It's 38 pages and it covers every single page of the municipal code. So basically, on the left side here, I have actual pages from the municipal code. And on the right side, I have diagrams that explain what all of this means. So I go code section by code section, explaining it all, and then offering tips on how to use these regulations or what the workarounds for these regulations are. So this is a pretty cool document, and I think the goal here is to provide some clarity in the city of San Diego's ADU municipal code.
Yeah, we'll include a link to this directly in the description of the video so people can download it, read through it, check it out on their own time. I would say it's essential because this is an update to one you had previously done a few years ago.
Mhm.
So I would say it's essential for people who are actually considering these projects for sure. So they'll definitely want to check that out.
Yeah, this document is the starting point for any ADU project, and it's also the core of all of the tools I've put together: the Pocket Communities Guide, the Critical Thresholds Guide. This one is the core to all of those, and the other tools that I've created are peripheral to this central one.
Right. So we'll have all that. And if you guys want to check out the other documents Sean just referenced, they're all on the homepage of the website, 1070architecture.com. Sean, if people are considering working with you in your studio, whether it be a full scale engagement or maybe they just have a couple quick questions about the development potential of their lot, what are some resources they can go to learn more?
So go to the website, 1070architecture.com, check out the Instagram at 1070 architecture. This YouTube channel is filled with tons of great resources, or you can send me an email directly to Sean, SEAN, at 1070architecture.com.